Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and I'm joined tonight by Logan.
Hello, everybody.
Um, it's a bit of a mixed bag this week. We had another loss in the league that we'll be talking about before a bit of success this morning in the League Cup, or the EFL Cup as it's now known. We'll start with the more of bad news, I suppose, with the Stoke loss in the Premier League. And I'll get your thoughts first on the lineup and also the result, Logan. In terms of the fact that Will Keane started up forward again, despite the fact he didn't look too impressive against Bournemouth.
Yeah, it was a confusing one, I'd imagine, especially considering the hype kind of going into the game, whether Hernandez would start, whether he wouldn't start, just because of the rumours of unrest and all the rest of it. But to see Will Keane up there, who really just hasn't really shown us anything to kind of warrant his spot, it was a bit perplexing to see Hernandez left out. So a very confusing one.
It's amazing because when he was signed, there was all that sort of discussion about his place at United and his standing at United, and the fact that before before Rashford hit the scene, I think Keane was actually rated higher than Rashford, and it was only the fact that Keane got injured at some point, it might have been in a cup game, that Rashford sort of leapt past him, and the rest is sort of history. But it's kind of amazing how far he's fallen in that sense, but also just, I mean, he's never had a particularly good strike record in the Championship with Preston and a couple of others. So, I mean, I really hope he can get going if he can score a couple of goals and get a bit of confidence.
Yeah, by no means do I think that Will Keane has nothing to offer. It just the thing that confused me was the fact that they obviously chose him for the Stoke option as opposed to what would seemingly have been a better fit for him to start against Bristol. So look, it's definitely a confusing one, but I guess it's Mike Phelan's the one in the job, and he's probably the one that's going to come under the most criticism. So yeah, look, if Will Keane does score a few goals in future, then he may be the first person to be praised, Mark Phelan. But until then, leaving Hernandez waiting in the shadows is definitely confusing.
And as he's now been labelled, the Aussie Sean Dyche last week, I think, said of Stoke that he hates it when we play Stoke because there's always a jaggy bastard who pops up with an absolute screamer, and it was an absolute screamer from Shaqiri for that first goal. And the second wasn't too bad either as a free kick. And it's always those games that are the most frustrating because you feel like you haven't necessarily been outplayed. I mean, I know we pretty much were in the first half, but when you concede goals like that and there's nothing you can do about them, it must be pretty frustrating as the players and also the supporters.
Yeah, it was very prophetic from the Aussie Sean Dyche indeed. And it kind of did. The game did have that feel about it, where it probably was like, as you mentioned, we weren't great, but to lose on the back of those two, yeah, it was a tough one to swallow, particularly when we were just looking for a giant response after the Bournemouth fixture. It was a really deflating feeling to come away from that game, knowing that it was just two moments of class really that separated the game.
And we've touched on Hernandez, and he did come on in the second half, unlike in the Bournemouth game where he didn't make an appearance. And we switched to a 3-5-2, and it was funny because the commentators were quite surprised when Maguire was coming on because they saw that as a more defensive substitution. But it actually ended up being a more attacking one because it released Elmo and Clucas on the wings to get further forward. And there was one passage of play where Clucas whipped in an absolutely beautiful cross where the commentators just went wild about it. Which kind of proved that point, that allowing Clucas and Elmo to get further up the field actually was a more attacking move. And so even though Maguire was coming on, it actually opened up the game a lot more. And Hernandez looked brilliant up top.
Yeah, and certainly we're accustomed to that formation at City, having followed Bruce in the Championship. And that was one that he kind of made famous in many respects at Hull. But yeah, I agree. When we went to 3-5-2, we looked much more of a threat, and we all know what Harry Maguire can do with the ball at his feet. Sometimes I think he confuses himself the centre half. So look, it was a good ploy, but yeah, it now begs the question: is what is our best formation?
Well, absolutely, and we'll talk more about the Bristol City game in a second, but it almost felt like we played a stronger 11 against Bristol City in some respects. Two incidents, not really off the field, but off the ball, I suppose you'd call them. The first was Shaqiri at the end of the game. I don't know if you've caught the footage, but he was involved in an incident with Clucas where he grabbed Clucas by the throat. And watching one of the Premier League shows the other day, I found it quite interesting in their ref watch segment when the ref basically said, "Oh, it was the right call to give him a yellow card because it's not." Dangerous play or it's not threatening behaviour, or it was some terminology like that. And I thought, I'm not sure how you can say that's not threatening play when he's gripped him by the throat, how it's not a sending off offence. If you're going to send people off for rubbing heads, I don't understand how gripping someone by the throat's not a red card. But did you see the incident? And if you did, what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I did see the incident, and to be honest, it looked like a handbags, to be perfectly honest. But to the letter of the law, I think the thing that was the most upsetting thing was Shaqiri actually pushed him first, and then followed it up with the stranglehold. And that was kind of the point that that they were making on that ref watch segment, which to the letter of the law you could understand if he was shown a red. Look, I think we're probably clutching at straws to be honest, but it certainly wouldn't have been surprising if he was issued it, particularly when you consider some of the headbutting incidents that we've seen from in the Premier League last year. I think perhaps Hernandez.
Are you thinking there was that Spurs game where was it Walker or someone headbutted a Palace player or Benteke? Oh no, Benteke wasn't there. I know there was a few last season for sure where actually I know what you're thinking of. You're thinking of Sagbo against Norwich in the first season.
Yeah, we're going way back, but it's exactly right. And you've seen incidences like that where it's been a straight red's been shown, and I mean,
and that was just for intent. He didn't even make contact.
Yeah, exactly. So look, it wouldn't have surprised me to see a red. You wonder if it was a City player if he would have seen a red. With our mindset,
with our luck, yeah.
Exactly, but look, I wasn't too didn't lose any sleep. But you're right, it could have certainly been that indeed.
Just an interesting talking point, I guess, and it highlights, I guess, that Clucas certainly got under Shaqiri's skin, and he was basically playing on Shaqiri on that left wing. And whilst I wouldn't really highlight Clucas's failings for the goals, it is obviously interesting that was the player who scored the goals. The other incident, of course, which is a bit more unfortunate from our point of view, is the Snodgrass injury that last night our time, this morning English time, I think, if I'm getting my time differences right, was basically announced as being out for 4 weeks. And I guess the silver lining of that is it's only 2 Premier League games that he'll miss, but the games against Watford and Southampton, it's an interesting one, and it's obviously really unfortunate for him. But I saw a great point made about it that Snodgrass is probably our only player who I wouldn't say is suited to the 3-5-2 formation, because you wouldn't play him as a wing back because I think that's too defensive for him. But otherwise, you're basically playing him too central. He doesn't really get a chance to be out on a wing. So in a way, it could end up being a blessing in disguise in making Phelan's tactical decisions a bit easier for him.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I couldn't agree more. It is one of those ones where Snodgrass is arguably being our player of the season thus far. Well, certainly in goal returns he has been, and was probably our kind of look-to man or go-to man for goals. So look, it's a bittersweet in the sense that yes, we do lose him, but you're right. It will give Mike Phelan kind of the selection opportunity to kind of try him and know that you're not leaving Snodgrass on the bench, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we will talk now about that Bristol City game, which was a bit more of a positive result from our point of view. And as I kind of touched on earlier, it was really interesting seeing the lineup because, in a way, that was almost a stronger 11. Well, in a lot of ways, really, a stronger 11 than the 11 that we put out against Stoke. I mean, barring Jakupovic in goal, who seems to be the most polarising player at the club since David Myler. Player for player, it was a stronger 11. I mean, Hernandez and Diomande up top instead of Keane and I guess Maloney. And then our midfield and our defence also was incredibly strong as well. And unsurprisingly, really, we got away with the result.
Yeah, exactly. I was very surprised to see the team sheet. And great to see Michael Dawson fit and on the score sheet himself, which can only be a positive considering the amount of goals we have leaked in the last month. So yeah, look, it was a very positive lineup, and obviously it showed with the result.
And also a promising display from Josh Tymon at left back, which I think it's actually his fourth appearance for us now, because I think he might have appeared against Exeter in the first or second round of the Cup, as well as those appearances last season. But it does raise the interesting question of whether he might come into contention for the weekend.
Well, he's certainly done his chances no harm. The cheapest player in Premier League history.
Yeah.
I think there's probably many people on the City side of things that would be loving, demanding that he does get a call up in a first start in the Premier League. And it certainly wouldn't be disheartening to see someone of that age in the black and amber, showing front against one of the big boys. It could only be a good thing for the future.
And the other interesting one is that polarising player. And there was a discussion before the game that if Jakupovic put in a good display and a confident display, whether there was any chance that he could displace Marshall in goal for Saturday. And I mean, there's debate about that goal, which, to be honest, I'd place the blame more on Huddleston, who admittedly looks like he might have pinged a string or something, chasing down the Bristol City player in question. I think it was Tomlin. But apart from that, he put in a pretty tremendous display, and he made a few pretty impressive saves as well. And you see his reaction after that goal and the way he berates the defence. And I mean, maybe I just haven't watched Marshall closely enough, but Marshall doesn't seem to have that same confidence to organise the defence, to marshal the defence, if you'll pardon the pun, and really get them going, as Jakupovic seems to.
Yeah, I think it's, as you said, Jakupovic must be the most polarising player in City, certainly in recent times. But I actually remember being at the Sheffield Wednesday game when we lost 1, and the Yak decided to cop a blow from a ghost and lie down, and I thought
I remember that game as well. Yeah.
The fact that guy at the time was all we really had, so to speak. I think perhaps maybe Ben Amos might have been on there.
I think you're right. Yeah. Well, I think we actually even might have had Oxley on the bench, because I think he came on and had his one and only City appearance, and we conceded another really poor goal because I think he'd pushed up for a late corner or something. Because I think we scored. I think it was 2-0, and we scored to make it 2-1, and tried to push for that equaliser, and then got caught on the counter. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it was the time when Amos was at the club, but he might have been injured or recalled by United for some reason, or whatever the story was.
Yeah, and I just remember thinking at that time, if this is all we have, we're in dire straits. Yeah. To see where he's come from, to the kind of the confidence that he seems to bring us at the back, particularly in current times. Look, yes, he had a couple of games where we even debated on the podcast as whether he should be the number one or Marshall should be, but. Given Marshall's form over the last month, I think for Yak to be not recalled would be an absolute travesty.
And it would just send such a poor message, I think, in terms of rewarding players for their form. And I understand it's a lot tougher to do that with a goalkeeper. But if any other player in the side, if you had Henriksen scoring a hat-trick, he would be one of the first names on the team sheet on the weekend. And as a goalkeeper, you can't score a hat-trick, but you can do the equivalent. You can pull off great saves, you can marshal the defence, you can organise your team, you can instill that confidence, which Jakupovic did everything expected of him, except keep a clean sheet, which, again, I just don't see as being something you can blame him for. And then following on from that, I guess I'd ask as a broader question, is there any player from that 11 that you would drop for the game against Watford?
Well, that's a very good question in the sense that if we are trying to kind of gain momentum from somewhere, look, nobody who was on the pitch, obviously you've mentioned whether Tymon starts or whether Tymon gets called into the squad. He would probably be the one that you would kind of sit there and have question marks over.
Because of course, Klukas is the player who's been left out, and he's had such an impressive start. So whether you fit him in.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't really find a way to leave Klukas out of the squad. So, I mean, look, the one that makes the most sense would be Klukas for Tymon. But look, with that being said, I wouldn't be too disheartened if Phelan was to go the other way and to keep the same starting 11. If it worked against Bristol, obviously Bristol are no Watford, but it's certainly worth considering. We've got to start from somewhere. And it just seems that over the last kind of month, where the results have been very wayward, the players that played well this morning or last evening, they deserve it. They really do deserve their chance to kind of keep things going.
Absolutely, and It's halfway through the round of fixtures at the moment, and by the time most people listen to this, I assume the draw will have been made and we'll have our opponent for the next round. But before that happens, from the sides that are already through, so we've got, Liverpool, Arsenal, Newcastle, and Leeds, I think, are the other sides from this morning, as well as potentially Southampton, Chelsea, and either United or City tomorrow morning, assuming that Sunderland doesn't upset Southampton or West Ham upset Chelsea. Who would you like to see as our opponent in the quarterfinals?
I think deep down, I think everybody's probably calling for Leeds. Just to have that Yorkshire derby, we hate them. And given the opportunity to kind of meet them, seeing we no longer play in their respective division in the championship, I think it would be good for all of us to see that fixture. Also, the fact that they are a lesser team than the other ones that are left in the draw. So yeah, let's call it Leeds.
And of course, the other interesting one would be if it was Newcastle, because of the two remaining championship clubs. There's a bit of spice with both of them. I mean, obviously the Yorkshire derby with Leeds, but if we played Newcastle, it'd be pretty fun to knock Diarmi out of the cup, I reckon. After he abandoned us at the start of the season, he managed 2 goals this morning for them, which is pretty impressive. But it'd be interesting if we can get a lesser opponent in the quarterfinal and really have a play for that semi-final spot, because semi-finals 2 legs, and anything can happen over 2 legs, and it could, all of a sudden you're looking at perhaps a final berth.
Yeah, I think if we're honest, we probably deep down know that we're going to find ourselves pipped against Arsenal.
Oh, you just know it. You just know it.
It's our cup fixture staple every year these days. So I'm just waiting, anxiously awaiting the Arsenal draw.
Look, in some ways, I'd be happy to get it out of the way in the League Cup so we can finally have a new FA Cup fixture.
Well, yeah. Depending on how the ballot runs again, we'll see.
Yeah. During the week, basically, I put out in a couple of places to get people's opinions of what they wanted us to chat about on the podcast, and there were a couple of interesting topics that popped up that I thought we'd cover just before we move on to the weekend's fixture. Against Stoke, there was the talking point about the fact that there was so many empty seats in the stadium. There were 8,000 empty seats, and I think someone had a stat that we'd had 7 or 8 larger crowds when we were in League 2. There's obviously all of this acrimony with the owners and all of this talk about it. Do you see any turnaround in the near future, or is it just simply a case of it's just going to get worse before it gets better, and it's going to take new owners coming in to improve the situation?
Look, I think that's the $1 million question, which everybody's asking. I'm not really too sure. I think it has to be a result of, a combination of poor performances on the pitch, and certainly the unrest that seems to kind of be lingering around the KCOM still. I think that the change in ownership is going to be the big one that will kind of revitalise fans. I think that the fans that are kind of protesting, or the regulars that don't seem to be coming, almost seem to have, they do have a direct issue with the alums. I think the moment they're released from all duties, I think we'll see a revitalised kind of attitude towards the club itself, and hopefully that leads to a reframing of the ticket pricing scheme and whatever else needs to happen to kind of unify the Hull City faithful. I think we will see. I think that'll be the first job for the new owners to kind of look at. But it's certainly a concern that there are 8,000 spare seats for
the Premier League game. Yeah. Absolutely. We also had finally an assistant head coach appointed for Phelan. It was McDonald, who has previously served under Sam Allardyce at a couple of places. I think West Ham and Blackburn might have been amongst them. He's also managed at Blackpool, unfortunately not keeping them up in League One, but I don't really think Alex Ferguson would have kept them up in League One the way that they're sort of plummeting through the divisions. Do you have any sort of opinion of him? Obviously, he's got a brilliant 100% winning record with us already, so he's off to a good start.
Off to a flyer, in the same way Mark Phelan was.
Yeah, he was, yeah.
To be perfectly honest, I think that whenever somebody of that nature gets appointed into those roles, you kind of just have to back the manager's decision. I think Mike Phelan's obviously has a lot of trust and faith in him. And I think for now, if we're to endorse Mike Phelan as our manager, look, whilst we don't seem to know too much about him, he probably doesn't come with the same name tag that perhaps Mike Phelan did when Bruce recruited him from United. But Look, if Mike Phelan is familiar with him, he obviously trusts his managing style and what coaching role he actually has. So look, we can only back him. But he's certainly relatively unknown to me, that's for sure.
And speaking of United, obviously we were linked to a couple of other names that people might have a better knowledge of in terms of Ryan Giggs and also Warren Joyce, who used to manage Hull back in the League Two days and masterminded the Great Escape that kept us up in the Football League. And he was linked with a bit of a wondrous return to the club as well in the press. And amid suggestions that Phelan might bring in a couple of other assistants or coaches or technical staff or whatever you want to call them, would you be keen to see or happy to see someone like a Giggs or a Joyce coming to the club?
I think it could only be a good thing in the sense that it would probably raise the profile. Whether that translates to results, again, what happens kind of in the behind the scenes or in the background stuff. I guess you're probably not always able to see, unless it's kind of through the form of results. But obviously they come with both Giggs and Joyce come with very respected name tags, and they're obviously good at their roles. And it could only be a good thing for City, I could imagine.
And then probably the last topic to cover before we move on to the Watford game is in terms of the unfortunate setback for Odebajo, which I think was announced during the previous week. It might have been in the lead-up to that Stoke game, which is really disappointing because we'd just heard news that he was actually ahead of schedule and likely to make a comeback next month even, which would have been remarkable. And now it looks like he's pretty much ruled out for the whole season. And with Robertson also out for about 8 weeks, it really highlights the fact that we need to go after a fullback in January, or even 2 fullbacks, really.
Yeah, certainly. The fullbacks are certainly going to be the order of the day come January. And I fear that if we don't recruit in that area, it may really spell disaster for kind of the relegation battle that we seemingly will find ourselves in.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting January for sure. And I mean, there was talk that the takeover might not be completed until Christmas. So I guess we can just have to cross our fingers and hope that it gets completed in time for the transfer window and we can get a bit of business done.
Yeah, certainly.
We'll move on now and talk about that Watford game. We're going to travel to Watford on the weekend. Watford themselves haven't been in spectacular form. They had a pretty scrappy win against Middlesbrough, I guess you'd call it, the other weekend, courtesy of a Holebas wonder goal. But they drew 0-0 last time out against Swansea, who I guess are sort of experiencing a bit of a honeymoon with their new manager, which might go some way to explaining it. But what's your read on this game? I mean, we're into this patch of supposedly easier fixtures now, but we've lost the first 2 of them. Do you see any sort of change in momentum against Watford?
Oh, look, we can only we certainly have to be optimistic. Barring the Shaqiri kind of wonder goals, we didn't look too out of it whilst we didn't play great against Stoke. I think Watford are certainly one of those teams that if we are to indeed stay up, they are the teams that we need to be eyeing 3 points against. Look, I think with the return of Michael Dawson and a bit of kind of hope from the cup win this morning, we can only head into this game with a positive mindset, and I think we can certainly be expecting 1 point. But obviously the 3 would be a very, very welcome change.
I think, as you alluded to when we were talking about that Bristol game, there's going to be a lot taken out of the team sheet, and I think that hour before the game starts, we'll be able to read a lot into how the game's going to play out from that. I mean, I think if Phelan selects that 3-5-2 with Dawson, Maguire, Davies at the back, Hernandez, Diamande up top, I would feel a lot more confident in getting a result out of the game, even if he sticks with Marshall in goal. Yak isn't going to win us points off his own gloves, but even if Marshall's in goal, if we've got Klukas at left wing back or however he plays them, I think those players, those 3 central defenders and having those 2 recognised strikers up top would really make a difference.
Yeah, certainly. I would just love to see. I'd be very surprised if Hernandez doesn't find himself in the starting lineup this week. And if he was to be accompanied with Diamande up top, and they were to kind of at least have a supporting role instead of leaving Hernandez up there by himself, which doesn't really seem to kind of warrant too much return. I really think that we could cause Watford some problems.
And I'd be remiss. I mean, I was meaning to mention it during the Bristol City review. Harry Maguire scored his first goal for the club, which was impressive. But even more impressive was that Aussie Sean Dyche. He really knows his stuff. He was very prophetic because last week he was saying that he thought Maguire should be pushed further forward and he might be a bit of a goal threat. So once again, proving spot on the money. And it'll be interesting to see if Maguire keeps his place in the team and maybe gets on the score sheet again.
Yeah, exactly. He's the contentious one. Does Maguire start? Does he not? Particularly with Dawson returning. Look, it's an interesting one. I personally would, with a little bit of momentum, having scored his first goal, it wouldn't be too bad to see him on the sheet.
So then, just before we round things up, I'll ask you who do you think has the most at stake this week against Watford? I think obviously the win this morning's maybe taken a bit of the pressure off Phelan, and some of the players will be feeling a bit more confident. But whose place is most at stake, or who do you reckon's most got the most pressure on them?
Without a doubt, if Marshall plays, he has everything to lose and not really too much to gain, but except if he was to keep an impressive clean sheet. But look, I've got a feeling that Yak will start, and if that happens, it'll be interesting to see kind of who else you would point the finger at. But it's certainly David Marshall.
And it's absolutely incredible to think we've only kept one clean sheet in all competitions this season, and it was against Swansea. Exeter, Stoke, and Bristol City all in the cup have scored against us, and then obviously everyone else in the league has scored against us, apart from Swansea. So it's a bit of a change from the days of Steve Bruce, where we'd grind out some pretty decent clean sheets.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's kind of you don't know what you've lost till it's gone kind of mentality, in the sense that we all used to be very quick to jump up and down when we weren't kind of seeing the goal returns. Now that we kind of seem to be a little bit more prevalent with the scoring, it seems to be coming on the wrong side, where we seem to be conceding a lot more. So it's kind of that tension as Hull City. Do you play that attacking flair football and try and outscore your opponents, or do you stick to that resolute defence and really not expect too much in the goal return?
Yeah, so it's going to be a very interesting lineup looking ahead to the weekend. And what would be your score prediction? What's the outcome you're expecting?
I will be praying dearly for a 1-0 City victory with Hernandez scoring.
Yeah, I'm getting that sense that Hernandez might get on the score sheet. He hit the crossbar against Bristol City, so I think he's really in the mood to make up for lost time. I'm thinking maybe a 1-1 draw. I can't see us keeping Watford out, but it'll be it would be a very close one, and I'm really hoping I'm not jinxing it by saying it'll be a very close one. I think we're going to be in that pink kit again, so as long as it's less than 6 goals conceded, that's a win in my books, to be honest.
That's exactly right. I think the comedy act will start when they walk out with the pink the pink shirts, and let's hope that that's where it ends.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Logan.
Not a problem.
And thank you everyone for listening in. Finally, we've had a win to talk about. It's been a while since we've had one of those to chat about, so hopefully you've enjoyed listening in, and until next time, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back 'cause you're out.